The man in the front row wasn't laughing. While 300 passengers roared with laughter at Frank DiMarco's comedy routine, one man sat motionless, studying him with cold, calculating eyes. Frank's 25 years as a Detroit homicide detective had taught him to recognize killers, and this wasn't just any tourist. When that same man's cabin was found splattered with blood the next morning, Frank realized his peaceful retirement on the high seas had just turned into the most dangerous case of his career. Because on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean, there's nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Welcome to Echo Stories. Before we begin this gripping story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. The Royal Caribbean's Majesty of the Seas was 7 days into its Eastern Caribbean cruise when Frank DiMarco took the stage for his nightly comedy show. At 62, Frank had been the ship's entertainment coordinator for 3 years, telling the same tired jokes to rotating audiences who didn't know the difference. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another evening of questionable humor and dad jokes that would make your teenagers cringe, Frank announced to polite laughter from the Crown Theater. But his eyes weren't on the appreciative crowd. They were locked on seat 12A, front row center, where a man in his 40s sat stone-faced among the laughing passengers. Dark hair, expensive suit, hands that never moved to applaud. Most entertainers would have dismissed him as a tough crowd. Frank saw something else entirely. 25 years with Detroit PD had taught him to read people like crime scenes. This man wasn't bored or unimpressed. He was studying, cataloging, planning. So I asked my wife, "Honey, what's the difference between a cruise ship and a casino?" Frank continued his routine, never breaking eye contact with the stranger. "On a cruise ship, you lose your money slowly." The audience erupted. The man didn't even blink. Frank had been Richard DiMarco then. Detective Richard DiMarco, Homicide Division, Detroit Metropolitan Police. 38 commendations, solving cases that made other cops quit. But that was before the burnout, before the divorce, before he decided chasing killers in Detroit wasn't worth dying for. The cruise ship gig had been perfect. Decent pay, travel, and the closest thing to violence he dealt with was the occasional drunk passenger. He'd traded his detective badge for a microphone and thought he'd left the darkness behind. "You know what they say about cruise ship food?" Frank continued, his comedian persona intact while his detective mind worked. "It's so good, people are dying to get seconds." More laughter. The man in 12A finally moved, reaching inside his jacket. Frank's hand instinctively moved toward his hip where his service weapon used to be. But cruise ship entertainers don't carry guns. The man pulled out a phone, typed something, and put it away. Then he stood up and walked out of the theater. Frank finished his set on autopilot, his mind racing through possibilities. Tourist with social anxiety, business executive on a working vacation, or something much worse. "Great set tonight, Frank," called out Margaret, the cruise director, as passengers filed out. "Though I noticed you seemed a bit distracted." "Just tired," Frank replied, watching the theater empty. "Long day." But he wasn't tired. He was alert in a way he hadn't been since leaving Detroit. Every instinct honed by 2.5 decades of police work was screaming that something was wrong. Frank made his way to the ship's security office on Deck 3. Chief Security Officer Mike Santos was reviewing the evening's incident reports, mostly drunk passengers and minor altercations. "Mike, can you pull up passenger manifests for me? Specifically, anyone who boarded in Fort Lauderdale, male, 40s, cabin assignments on the upper decks?" Santos looked up, surprised. "This for your act? Working on some new material about passenger types?" "Something like that." Santos pulled up the information. "We've got about 40 men in that demographic. What are you looking for exactly?" Frank studied the list, cross-referencing faces in his memory. "I'll know it when I see it." Frank was up at 5 a.m., walking the ship's deck before most passengers were awake. Old habits from his police days. Early morning clarity, fresh perspective on problems. The Caribbean sun was just breaking the horizon when his phone buzzed. "Frank, we need you in security immediately." Santos's voice was tight with stress. Frank found the security office in controlled chaos. Santos was coordinating with the ship's medical team while Captain Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio. What's going on? Passenger in VIP Suite 1247, Marcus Webb, 43, from Chicago. Cabin steward found him this morning when he didn't respond to housekeeping. Santos pulled up crime scene photos on his monitor. It's bad. Frank looked at the images and felt his old detective instincts snap into focus. Blood spatter on the walls, defensive wounds on the victim's hands, signs of a struggle but organized cleanup afterward. This wasn't random, Frank said quietly. What? Santos looked confused. Nothing. I mean, it's terrible. Poor guy. But Frank's mind was cataloging details the ship's security team wouldn't think to notice. The killer was methodical, experienced, and based on the crime scene staging, this wasn't their first time. The man from the front row materialized in Frank's memory, the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he'd left during the performance, right after making that phone call. Frank spent the morning discreetly asking questions around the ship. Marcus Webb had been traveling alone, kept to himself, spent most of his time at the ship's casino. No known enemies, no apparent motive for murder, but Frank knew better than to take anything at face value. He found the night shift bartender from the Deck 12 lounge. Joey, you work near the VIP suites, right? See anything unusual last night around midnight? Funny you ask. There was this guy, well-dressed, went up to that deck around 11:30. Didn't come back through the lounge, though. Must have used the stern elevator. Can you describe him? 40s, dark hair, expensive suit. Looked like money, but something off about him. Didn't order a drink, just asked about cabin locations. Frank felt his pulse quicken. Did he ask about any specific cabin? Now that you mention it, yeah. Asked where the 1200 block was. Frank knew he should report his suspicions to ship security, but he also knew they weren't equipped for this. Ship security handled drunk passengers and petty theft, not methodical murder. By the time they involved the FBI and reached port, the killer could have disposed of evidence and disappeared among 3,000 passengers. He started with what he knew best, victimology. Who was Marcus Webb really, and why was he targeted? Using the ship's internet cafe, Frank ran searches that his old police contacts would have called in favors for. Webb was a small-time Chicago businessman with connections to several import-export companies. Clean record, but the kind of businesses that attracted attention from organized crime. The pieces were falling into place. Webb wasn't a random victim. He was eliminated for a specific reason. And the killer was still on the ship. Day 4 of the cruise brought another discovery. Elena Vasquez, 38, found dead in her balcony cabin on Deck 8. Different victim profile, different location, but Frank recognized the same methodical staging. This time, he didn't wait for security to brief him. He made his way to the crime scene while the medical team was still processing. Frank, you shouldn't be here, Santos protested. I know, but I might be able to help. I used to work law enforcement. It was a massive understatement, but it got him access to the scene. Frank examined the evidence with trained eyes, seeing patterns the ship's security team missed. Vasquez had defensive wounds, suggesting she fought back. The cabin was staged to look like a robbery, but valuable jewelry was left behind. Most telling, there were traces of a specific cologne that Frank had noticed in the theater the night of his performance. The killer was escalating, but also getting careless. That evening, Frank called a meeting with Captain Rodriguez and Security Chief Santos. It was time to reveal who he really was. Gentlemen, I haven't been entirely honest about my background. Before I worked cruise ships, I spent 25 years with Detroit Police Department Homicide Division. I've investigated over 200 murder cases, including several serial killers. The silence in the captain's quarters was deafening. You're saying you think we have a serial killer on board? Captain Rodriguez asked. I'm saying we have a professional killer who's eliminated 2 specific targets and is planning to disappear when we reach port tomorrow. Frank laid out his analysis. The victim's connections to import businesses, the methodical crime scene staging, the killer's reconnaissance during his comedy show. The man I observed has maritime travel experience. He knows ship layouts, security procedures, passenger patterns. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. With the captain's authorization, Frank took point on the investigation. Ship security provided support while he implemented tactics from his police days, adapted for the unique environment of a cruise ship. First, they identified the suspect. Using security footage and passenger manifests, they pinpointed Vincent Torino, 44, traveling under a false identity with expertly forged documents. His cabin was registered to a dead-end address in Miami. Torino was a professional cleaner for organized crime, specialized in eliminating witnesses and loose ends during maritime operations. He used cruise ships as mobile bases, targeting victims in international waters where jurisdiction was unclear. But Frank had him now. Frank found Torino in the ship's casino, calmly playing blackjack as if he hadn't murdered 2 people in 3 days. The professional killer's composure was impressive, but Frank had dealt with worse in Detroit. Vincent Torino. Or is it Michael Castellano? Hard to keep track of aliases. Torino looked up from his cards with the same cold calculation Frank had seen in the theater. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "You should. You spent half my comedy shows studying me instead of laughing. 25 years of police work teaches you to notice when someone's sizing you up for elimination." The casino continued around them, tourists oblivious to the confrontation unfolding at table 7. "You have an interesting imagination, Mr. Detective Richard DiMarco, Detroit PD, retired, but apparently not as retired as I thought." Torino's hand moved slightly toward his jacket. Frank was ready. "I wouldn't. Ship security is positioned at every exit, and Captain Rodriguez has already contacted the FBI. We dock in 6 hours, and they'll be waiting." What happened next took 30 seconds and 25 years of experience. Torino made his move, pulling a ceramic knife designed to pass ship security. Frank countered with techniques that had kept him alive in Detroit's most dangerous neighborhoods. Casino security cameras captured the brief struggle, ending with Torino restrained and weapons secured. Ship security, coordinated by Frank's tactical experience, contained the situation without civilian injuries. In Torino's cabin, they found evidence linking him to 17 professional killings across 6 countries, all conducted during maritime travel. The FBI later called it one of the most significant captures of an international assassin in decades. As the ship docked in Fort Lauderdale, Frank watched FBI agents escort Torino off in handcuffs. Media swarmed the port, but Frank avoided the cameras, letting Captain Rodriguez handle the press. Detective DiMarco, Agent Sarah Chen, approached him. "The Bureau would like to discuss a consulting position. Your maritime law enforcement experience could be valuable." Frank smiled. "Thanks, but I'm retired." Really retired this time. But even as he said it, Frank knew he was lying to himself. The hunt was in his blood. 3 years of cruise ship entertainment hadn't changed that. 2 weeks later, Frank was back on stage. Different ship, different audience. His comedy routine had improved. Real experience always beats fake material. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Carnival Paradise. I'm Frank DiMarco, and I've got some great jokes for you tonight. But first, let me give you a safety tip. If someone in the front row isn't laughing at my jokes, notify security immediately. The audience roared with laughter, unaware they were listening to the man who'd captured one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. Frank's eyes scanned the crowd out of habit, looking for anything unusual, anyone who didn't fit. Because once a cop, always a cop, even when you're wearing a sequined jacket and telling dad jokes to tourists. Some retirements never really stick. And so, on a luxury cruise ship in the Caribbean, it was once again proven that the most dangerous people are often hiding in plain sight. But sometimes, so are the heroes. Frank DiMarco had traded his detective badge for an entertainer's microphone, but he never lost the instincts that made him one of Detroit's finest. When evil found him in paradise, he was ready. Real protectors don't just change careers, they carry their mission wherever they go. Whether it's the mean streets of Detroit or the pristine decks of a cruise ship, some people are born to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them.